The morning of June 23, 1944, dawned with an eerie quiet along the Eastern Front. Lieutenant Colonel Anthony McAuliffe had seen plenty of combat since D-Day, but nothing had prepared him for what was about to unfold in the dense forests of eastern France. What began as a routine reconnaissance mission would become one of the most psychologically devastating encounters of World War II, where one American officer's refusal to accept reality would fundamentally shake the confidence of an entire German regiment. McAuliffe wasn't supposed to be there. His unit, a mixed company of infantry and engineers, had been tasked with mapping German defensive positions behind enemy lines when their radio went dead and their planned extraction point was overrun. Cut off from friendly forces with limited ammunition and supplies, military doctrine dictated an immediate withdrawal to avoid capture or annihilation. But McAuliffe had studied the intelligence reports, and he knew something his superiors didn't. The German unit they were facing was composed largely of teenage conscripts and middle-aged reserves, men whose morale was already shattered by months of devastating Allied advances. The German commander, Major Wilhelm Hartmann, had been fighting since the invasion of Poland in 1939. He was a professional soldier who understood the mathematics of warfare. A reinforced company couldn't hold out against a full regiment indefinitely. When his scouts reported the American position, Hartmann expected a standard engagement, a brief firefight, followed by either American retreat or surrender. What he got instead would haunt him for the rest of his life. McAuliffe made a decision that violated every principle of conventional military tactics. Instead of attempting to break contact and withdraw, he ordered his men to dig in and prepare for a prolonged defense. More importantly, he began a psychological campaign designed to convince the Germans that his small force was actually the advance element of a much larger American unit. Using captured German radio equipment, his communications specialist began broadcasting false troop strength reports and fictional reinforcement schedules, always ensuring the transmissions were just weak enough that German radio operators would believe they were intercepting genuine American communications not intended for their ears. The first assault came at dawn on June 24th. Hartmann's men advanced, expecting to quickly overwhelm the American position. But what they encountered shook their understanding of battlefield reality. McAuliffe had positioned his men in a defensive perimeter that appeared far too confident for a trapped unit. Instead of the desperate resistance typical of encircled forces, the Americans fought with the methodical precision of troops who expected relief at any moment. Even more unsettling, they seemed to have unlimited ammunition, firing at rates that suggested massive supply stockpiles. The ammunition abundance was, of course, an illusion. McAuliffe had ordered his men to concentrate their fire during specific periods, creating brief but intense barrages that suggested much larger numbers, then maintain near-complete silence between attacks. The psychological effect on the German conscripts was devastating. They began to believe they were facing a much larger force, possibly an entire battalion, that was playing with them before delivering a crushing counterattack. But McAuliffe's masterstroke was yet to come. Using intelligence gathered from captured German documents, he discovered that Hartmann's regiment was expecting reinforcements from a neighboring unit within 48 hours. McAuliffe realized that if he could create doubt about the size and nature of his own force, he might be able to turn the German expectation of victory into paralyzing uncertainty. He began what military historians would later call aggressive defensive operations, raids and probing attacks that no trapped unit should have been capable of mounting. On the night of June 25th, McAuliffe personally led a 12-man raid against German positions that should have been impossible for an encircled force to execute. The psychological impact was immediate and profound. German soldiers began questioning everything they had been told about the American position. If these Americans were truly trapped and outnumbered, how could they mount aggressive attacks against superior forces? The only logical explanation from the German perspective was that the Americans weren't trapped at all. They were the trap. Hartmann found himself in an impossible position. His intelligence told him he was facing a small, isolated American unit that should have surrendered or been destroyed already. But the evidence of his own eyes suggested something entirely different. A confident, well-supplied force that seemed to be conducting deliberate operations rather than fighting for survival. The contradiction began to erode not just his tactical confidence, but his fundamental understanding of the military situation. The breaking point came on June 26th, when McAuliffe executed perhaps the most audacious bluff in military history. Using the captured German radio, he transmitted a message directly to Hartmann's headquarters, identifying himself by name and rank and offering the German commander an opportunity to surrender before American reinforcements arrived. The transmission was broadcast on frequencies that the Germans would assume were secure, making it appear that the Americans had not only broken German codes but were so confident of victory that they were willing to reveal their communications capabilities. The psychological effect was catastrophic for German morale. Hartmann's men began to see evidence of American strength everywhere. Normal battlefield sounds became indicators of massive troop movements. Routine supply runs became proof of unlimited resources, and standard defensive preparations became signs of an impending American offensive. The teenage conscripts, already demoralized by months of retreat and defeat, began to whisper that they were facing not just American soldiers, but some kind of supernatural force that could see through walls and predict German actions. McAuliffe reinforced this growing sense of unreality through carefully orchestrated psychological operations. His men would disappear from their positions during the day, leaving behind obvious signs of their presence. Freshly dug foxholes, abandoned equipment, cooking fires, then reappear in completely different locations by nightfall. To the Germans, it seemed as if the Americans could move through solid earth or become invisible at will. The rational explanation that McAuliffe had discovered a network of drainage tunnels that allowed concealed movement never occurred to soldiers whose grip on reality was already weakening. The climax came on June 27th, when Hartmann finally received his promised reinforcements, a battalion of veteran troops who should have been more than sufficient to crush any American resistance. But by this point, the psychological damage was complete. Hartmann's original regiment was so convinced of American supernatural capabilities that they infected the new arrivals with their fears and delusions. Instead of launching an immediate assault, the combined German force spent precious hours trying to understand how a small American unit could have held out for so long against superior numbers. That delay proved fatal to German hopes. While Hartmann's men debated the impossible nature of their opponents, actual American reinforcements, a full armored battalion that had been fighting to reach McAuliffe's position for 4 days, finally broke through German lines. What the Germans had feared was an illusion, became reality with devastating suddenness. The psychological reversal was complete. The German force that had been hunting a trapped American unit suddenly found themselves surrounded by a combined American force that outnumbered them 3-1. The German surrender came not through military defeat, but through psychological collapse. Hartmann, a veteran officer who had survived 5 years of combat, found himself unable to distinguish between reality and deception. His final radio transmission to German headquarters was a rambling report about American forces that could move through solid ground and anticipate German actions with supernatural accuracy. German intelligence officers who later interrogated captured members of Hartmann's unit described them as men who had lost faith in their ability to understand the nature of warfare itself. McAuliffe's achievement went far beyond the tactical victory of defeating a superior force. He had demonstrated that in modern warfare perception could be more powerful than reality, and that a commander willing to risk everything on a psychological gamble could achieve results that no amount of conventional military power could duplicate. His refusal to retreat when retreat was the only rational option had not just saved his men's lives, it had fundamentally altered the mental state of an entire enemy regiment. The aftermath of the engagement revealed the broader implications of McAuliffe's psychological warfare. German units throughout the sector began reporting encounters with American forces that displayed impossible capabilities. The stories spread through the German army like a virus, creating a perception that American soldiers possessed some kind of supernatural advantage that made conventional military resistance futile. The psychological impact extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation, contributing to the general collapse of German morale in the final months of the war. When military historians later analyzed the engagement, they found that McAuliffe had intuitively understood principles of psychological warfare that wouldn't be formally codified until decades later. His use of captured communications equipment to feed false information to enemy forces, his manipulation of battlefield appearances to create false impressions of strength, and his exploitation of enemy expectations to create psychological paralysis would all become standard elements of modern military doctrine. The personal cost to McAuliffe was severe. The psychological strain of maintaining such an elaborate deception while under constant threat of discovery and death took a toll that lasted long after the war ended. He later described the experience as living in a constant state of controlled terror, knowing that a single mistake in his performance could result in the death of all his men. The responsibility of maintaining morale among his own troops while simultaneously destroying the morale of the enemy required a level of mental compartmentalization that few human beings could sustain. Today, McAuliffe's stand is studied in military academies around the world as an example of how individual leadership and psychological innovation can overcome seemingly impossible odds. His refusal to retreat when retreat was the logical choice demonstrated that sometimes the most irrational decision can be the most effective, provided it's executed with absolute conviction and tactical brilliance. The German regiment that questioned reality after encountering his impossible defense became a testament to the power of one man's refusal to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed not just probable but inevitable.